Hi class, let's start the chapter. Okay, so in this chapter, we'll talk about environment constraints on managers. There is three types of constraints, really. The external environment refers to forces outside the organization that might affect its performance. And these are the external environment are three. We have what you call the specific environment, and then we have the general environment, and then we have the global environment, which is the third part, is the outside. And we'll talk about each one of them. If we see at this graph, management or concerns should be concerns with all these types, three types. The specific environment or include the customer, social and political action groups, competitors, trade and industry association, government, media, suppliers, community, stakeholders, unions, and employees. I usually have each one of them at least 2 or 3 chapters. We should cover it, but we're going to go briefly explain these stuff. And then you have the general environment, which is political, legal, socio-cultural. We have technological, environment, and economics. And then we have the global environment. Now, in the specific environment means the specific environment include the external forces that have a direct and immediate impact on the manager decision and action. Each organization's specific environment is unique and variable. Managers are affected by the relationship they have with external stakeholders. So who's the stakeholders? Stakeholders group that have a stake in or are significantly influenced by what the organization does. Now, sometimes you look at the chart, and the chart shows the authorities, but then there is the hidden or behind the picture, it's a different type of authority. We'll explain that too. Now, the general environment include a broad political, economic, socio-cultural, technological, environmental, and legal conditions, which is called, well, PESTOL, which stands for the first letters of all these, that affect the organization. Change in these areas usually do not have as large or immediate impact as change in a specific environment. So these are kind of will affect you, but not immediately. But manager must consider them as they plan, organize, lead, and control for the futures, but also futuristic law. PESTOL is acronym, as I said, for the 6 general environment factors. There is what you call the political conditions. Consider the political climate instability of a market. Government influence what organization do. Then you have the economic conditions such as interest rate, inflation, disposable income, stock market fluctuation. They all influence the management practices. And then what do you call the socio-cultural condition, which is the changing expectation of society as well as change demographic trends affect managers' decision and action. Anyone knows the difference between DSS and ESS applications? Think about it. The general environment, we continue here, is what then we have the technological conditions. Advances in technology are changing the way that organizations are structured and the way the managers are managed. A good example, when you bring a new app, such as HR app, or financial, the structure changes. Then you have the environmental conditions, how organizations treat the environment in which they operate, as well as sustainability practice. One of very impressive one is Subaru. They make less garbage than in one household. And then we have what you call the legal condition, which is legislation and regulations that govern how businesses most operates. There is a total picture of how environment affect managers. So on the top, when it's about environmental uncertainties matrix. And it's divide the degree of changes, how fast is things changes, and the degree of complexities. How complex is this? Which is the degrees of complexities we have two types, which is a simple, and then you have a very complex environment, keep changing. And then you have the degree of change, how fast things is changing. You have something stable, doesn't change that fast, and then you have the dynamic. Under these, we will explain the stable and the predictabilities of the environment. Because if it's a dynamic, then it's a dynamic and unpredictable environment. And if it's stable, then it's a stable and predictable environment. We will go through each one of them separately and bring some examples. The IT environment. Where do you fit the IT environment into these four? Now, the challenges manager faces in a global environment. In the global environment, managers must deal with cultural, economic, and political differences. New competitor can suddenly appear at any time these days, from any place on the global. Managers who make no attempt to learn and adapt to changes in the global environment end up reacting, and you don't want to be reacting. Rather than innovating to match the future strength and requirements. Now, how organizations get involved globally? They could have something, a minimum, or they can be an extreme. Now, in the minimum global environment or investment, when you invest there, might be you have something like a global sourcing or outsourcing. Okay. Then as gets more deeper, a company might have involved in exporting and importing, providing licensing or franchising. Then the extreme one or the significant global investments such as strategic alliance, joint venture, and foreign subsidiaries. Tell me why Apple selected China. They wanted to have their operation somewhere and they selected China. That's a question to think about it. How organization go global? Global sourcing. We said in a global sourcing, purchasing material and labor from around the world, wherever it is cheapest. Exporting, making product at home and selling them abroad. Importing is selling products at home that are made abroad. Tourism, is it exporting or importing? Let me know. So what's licensing and franchising? It is about giving another organization the right to use its name, technology, or a product specification. A franchising is used by service organization to use another company's name and operating method. Some example of franchising. Name it. Then we have a strategic alliance, which is the extreme one, is a partnership between companies, domestics and foreign, to share the resources in developing a new product or building production facilities. And we say it in the world, there is 4 types of businesses only. In a joint venture, a specific type of a strategic alliance where partner from a separate independent organization for a business purpose. In the foreigner subsidies or subsidiaries is basically it's a direct investment in a foreign countries by creating a separate and independent production facilities or offices. We see China and the Silk Road, how active in investing in other countries. Now tell me, in a global environment, manager must deal with the cultural, economic, and political differences, always. So the question comes in, which has a greater effect on employees, not on the organization, on employees? Is it the cultural, organizational culture or the national culture? I'll leave that for our discussion. Now, cultural environment. There is what you call cultural environment, and there is a subject called cultural dimension theory, or Hofstede 6 dimensions. He's dividing it into 6 dimensions, which is power distance, individualism versus collectivism, masculinities versus feminities, uncertainty avoidant, pragmatic versus normatic or normative, and indulgent versus the restraint. In the power distance, you used the term power distance as a measure of extent to which a society accepts the fact that power in institutions or organization is distributed unequally. There's what you call high power distance, which is accept of wide differences in power, great deal of respect to those in authority, titles, rank, and status carry a lot of weight, such as professor versus instructor versus teacher. Then you have the lower distance, lower power distance, which is placed down inequalities. Employees are not afraid to approach, nor are they in of the boss. Individualism versus collectivism. And this is kind of East versus West. Individualism is a degree to which people in a country prefer to act as individuals rather than as a member of a group. Collectivism is characterized by a societal framework in which people prefer to act as a member of a group. In other words, individualistic people are look after their own and family interests because of the freedom afforded by society. Collective or collectivist people expect the group to look after and protect them. Now, here it says masculinities and femininities is not about male and female. It's the behavior that attached to person or the characteristics attached to person. In masculinity's side of this dimension represent a preference in society for achievement, while the femininity side is more nurturing. So one is looking for more achievement and the other type is looking more in nurturing thing. Achievement is the value such as assertiveness, acquiring money and goods, and heroism prevail there. Society is competitive, basically. And nurturing values such as relationship, concerns for others, cooperation, and equality of life prevail. Society is consensus oriented. Give me some example. Is Canada or society, which one of them in general? Then you have what you call uncertainty avoidance. In the high uncertainty avoidance is the threatened by ambiguities and experience high level of anxieties and stress. Intolerant for unorthodox ideas. You probably need to know as a society, where do we fit? And then you have the low on uncertainties avoidance is comfortable with the risk, tolerant of different behavior and opinions. Then you have what you call pragmatic versus normative. The dimensions describe how people relate to the fact that so much that happens around us cannot be explained. Normative is a society with a normative orientation. Most of people have a strong desire to explain as much as possible. People in such society have a strong concern with establishing the absolute truth and a need for personal stabilities. In the pragmatic, which is more reverse and more interesting, people that you're going to deal with because you have to be as pragmatic as them sometimes, and sometimes you need to be normative if you're reacting. In a pragmatic, in a society with a pragmatic orientation, most people do not have a need to explain everything, as they believe that it is impossible to understand fully the complexities of life. The challenge is not to know the truth, but to live a virtuous life. In society with a pragmatic orientation, people believe that the truth depends very much on situation, context, and time. They show an ability to accept contradictions, adopt according to their circumstances, show a strong propensity to save and invest, and demonstrate thriftiness and perseverance in achieving results. Indulgence versus restraint. Indulgent people look to the future and value gratifications of freedoms of expression. Restraints people value a tradition and the past are comfortable suppressions their needs. US versus Russia, that's a good example. We're done for that. Thank you.